that the pundits and the sociologists seem to be attributing the victory of Trump to. But there's really, you can actually look at the some 70,000 people in the 3 key states, of Michigan, Wisconsin, and what was it, Pennsylvania, and say, well, this is where they were who made the decision. And in fact, there were 3 million more people that voted for Hillary Clinton than he. So that this ability to focus on the alienation that you're talking about, it would be helpful if you could focus on, who you believe are the ones that are alienated and how it manifested in a way that makes a proximate difference.
Okay. Well, I think one of them that really came to mind was an example of going green, kind of technology, that sort of thing. You have people in third world countries that are limited, when using gas and coal sort of things, and there's this kind of elitist narrative to put them on electricity and solar panels or whatever, but those things are just so expensive, so that's an angle that I kind of wanted to take as well. Simply classism has separated so many people from reaching these green sort of technologies as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, one of the things you want to be careful of, and I noted it in a few of the papers, is that you have to be careful about raising a number of different issues, each of which is interesting and could really be explored, but just kind of tossing out 2 or 3 of them and not ever really explaining what the relationship is between them and not going in as deeply as you can on any given one of them. So that you have to be careful, because it ends up then you get done reading the paper and you're going, I'm not sure what the relationship among these things are. Or if you're going to point them out, you can point out what the relationships are and then talk about the relationships and what that means. Okay? All right. Yes. What do you think?
Ideally, I would like to deconstruct and rebuild capitalism in an attempt to follow FDR's Union of the Address, in which we need to, the Constitution doesn't support the right to economic independence and freedom, and in doing that, we can shift from fossil fuels and all that to actually renewable energy, and I see that best happening by reconstructing capitalism and the economic system in the United States.
All right. Well, it's really a logical topic, because to the extent to which people are referencing the meme of the New Deal, to actually look back at the New Deal itself and see exactly what the component elements of it were. And as you know, that one of the more common observations that are made about it is that despite the fact that the capitalist class was furious with Franklin Roosevelt and even went to the point of trying to overthrow him in 1934, the fact of the matter is that he saved their butt. And there would have been a much more radical kind of socialist type of solution if he hadn't stepped in and salvaged the capitalist system. And so that the revisiting of that, there's a let me help you out. There's a theme that could help here. There's a book that I've mentioned it just in passing in the course. It's called Generations: A History of America's Future, and it's written by a fellow named Strauss and another fellow named Howe. Strauss and Howe wrote this book, and they talk about the fact that there are a number of issues in the book, but that in every 100-year period, there are basically 4 distinct generations. And they range from anywhere from 20 to 25 years, each of them, and that they play a distinctive role relative to each other. And that every single 100-year period, not marked by 1900 to 2000 or on the button like that, but different, usually defined by major social events that take place. And that every 100 years there's the rise of these 4 generations. And one of these generations is an idealist generation. Another one is a reactive generation. Another one is a civic generation. And the fourth one is what they call an adaptive generation. You guys are the civic generation of the 21st century. And the civic generation is charged with addressing the major secular crisis of that 100-year period, which in this case is global climate change for your generation. And they, in fact, do this usually in alliance with the idealist generation of that same 100-year period. That's us. That's the boomers. See them all hanging out here in the back here, ready to support you guys. And that there is a thing that they point out, and that is that the civic generation, in coordination with the idealist generation, look to the ideals of the culture and see how the previous civic generation in the previous 100-year cycle, that would be for the 20th century, and that was the World War II generation. The group they're all going to be celebrating here in the next couple days, throwing themselves on Omaha Beach and, getting slaughtered in front of the 50 calibers. That whole generation, that was the civic generation that was dealing at that point with the major crisis of capitalism. And it had imposed this massive depression on the world, and that the way that capitalism was attempting to manifest itself was in the form of the fascist regime of Germany and Japan and Italy under Mussolini, and that it had gotten forward-leaning out over its skis and had generated this massive world war, and that therefore the crisis, the secular crisis of that 20th century was the crisis of capitalism. And so therefore, the Franklin Roosevelt administration coming forward to address that, he was a member of the civic generation of the 20th century. And that the idealist generation of the 20th century had been the progressives of the Chautauqua movement, actually, from the early 20th century. And so that the solution, and one of the things that's pointed out is that the reason that each 100-year period has the resurgence of a new major secular crisis is usually because the previous civic generation did not really solve the problem. What they did is they struck a compromise, because they were the ones faced in real life with the consequences of the crisis, and they had to solve it. They couldn't just sit around twiddling their thumbs like the idealists, who are throwing out all these kind of big idealistic things and not necessarily putting an adequate shoulder to the wheel. Okay, so that this revisiting of the continuing imperfections of the capitalist system that have generated the global climate crisis is a very important theme to pick up on and to try to figure out whether a deeper solution to this can be found. Okay? All right. So what else? Because I'm going to try to be as helpful as I can in like additional readings and stuff that you guys might do in preparation for your paper, so that it flows out of what it is you really want to do. Okay, so you must be. There must be lots of. I'll just throw that on the floor if it gets in the way. But you just think of some things that you're entertaining. It isn't. You don't have to be wedded to it, but just tell me what your thoughts are at this stage. Yes.
Sorry, all the way back here.
That's okay. That's why I usually get you guys to come up. But yes.
I was planning on writing about the evolution of manifest destiny.
Huh?
I was planning on writing about the evolution of manifest.
No, I heard you. Yes, I'm just going, aha.
And theoretically how that's the foundation of American imperialism and like this global empire within like the corporate sector. And what I was going to tie is political facets, economic facets, and then social repercussions. So how the government has been tied with private entities, and at that point how social norms have changed, education has changed, and how societies and American society in general and other regions and sovereignties as well have suffered because of political and economic forces.
Okay, I would recommend a thing for you to take a look at. There is an article that I think I've got a copy of it actually here. There's an article that was. You got your notes? His name is Nafeez, N-A-F-E-E-Z, Ahmed, A-H-M-E-D. And it's called How the Trump Regime Was Manufactured by a War Inside the Deep State. Now this is put out by a thing called Insurge Intelligence. It's extraordinarily intelligent piece of work, and it touches on the very issue you're talking about. That the people who are behind Trump, and this gets down into the deep analysis of who all these different factions are that are behind Trump, talks about this issue of their belief is that the global climate problem that's being caused, the attack on the resources and all that, is because of all the non-white people. And that they're overpopulating and they're coming into our country, and they're sitting on our resources, different parts of the world, et cetera. And it's a sophisticated understanding of this concept of manifest destiny, because the manifest destiny operates. It's an immediate partner of the white man's burden as it manifested itself. Okay, and that you'll find that article to be helpful, I think, to you.
Can I add a quick little thing to that too? There's also the doctrine of discovery, which might be an interesting avenue of actually changing the roots of manifest destiny in a real way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You'll want to look that one up too. That manifest destiny is directly linked to this issue of the doctrine of discovery, in which the Catholic Church. Yes.
Well, actually, I was going to tie it on, it's Francisco, I forget this is his last name, but I was going to tie how it's more originated from divine law.
Yes, that's the one. That's the divine law. That's the doctrine of discovery. That was issued by Pope Alexander VI, back in 1893. Yep, 1493. That's right. There were actually two of them, but that's. Yeah, well, actually, there was three. That he did two of them, and then the later pope did one. So there's a whole set of them. That divine origins of the theoretical superiority of the Catholic Christian white people is important. Okay, that's a good one. Okay. See now, how's your level of thinking going here? We've got another 10 minutes or so. So I'll start calling you. What are your thoughts so far?
I don't really know if this counts, but I was going to do voting because, honestly, I have never voted before. So I feel like that would be the thing to do, especially for myself. And I know a lot of people don't vote, so that was my point. Okay,
now you might take up a supplement to that, and that is that the one of the reasons why people are not as interested in voting is because they don't think they have adequate choices. Okay, so that there are two major things going on in that area. One is their attempt to suppress access to the ballot for the people that the reactionaries think are going to vote against them, which has to do not only with black people, Hispanic people, but young people. And so that, for example, right now you see an example of it. There is now, just as you guys are getting set to leave for summer vacation, the conservatives on the city council here have decided that they're going to undertake a recall petition against two of the four progressives that got elected the last election, largely with the vote of the students. Okay? And so what they're doing is they were laying in wait for you guys to go away on your summer vacation, and they're mounting this recall petition to try to get rid of 2 of the progressives in the 4-person majority now in the city council. So that effort to suppress the vote of the people who are more progressive, I'll point out in all fairness, it isn't just the reactionaries that do this. The fact is there's a great history or an ignoble history of Republicans and Democrats alike doing this. You know, trying to identify who the voters are that might vote against them and doing whatever they can to keep them from voting. To the point of sending out false notices as to what the day of the elections are. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. And another one, like for example, in New York, when I first went down to the big law firm on Wall Street out of law school, that I discovered that the voter registration office was open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday, right when working people were all working. And it turns out that it was run by the Democratic Party machine because they didn't want more voters, because they'd figured out a way to assert control over those voters they had. They knew where they were, they had their addresses and phone numbers, and they could mobilize those people. And so they really didn't want more people. And so that when we wanted to start registering new people to vote, young people to vote, black people to vote, Hispanic people to vote, the Puerto Rican people to vote, that they refused to allow us to have what we call mobile voter registration. And so we sued them. I sued them. And we won in the federal court there. And the federal court entered an injunction ordering them to allow us to do mobile voter registration. So what we did is we went up, we got the Isley brothers, and we got the Yankee Stadium, and we invited everybody to come for free to a concert of the Isley brothers. And they, as their admissions, they had to register to vote. And so we did. Then we rented Madison Square Garden, and we got Simon and Garfunkel to come back together again, and the people whom you never heard of, Mike Nichols and Elaine May, to come together. And we had a big thing called Together Again, and we did the same thing. And we broke all the records in the history of New York in registering new voters. So this issue of you wanting to vote, you want to take a look at this issue of the effort to suppress votes that both political parties do, and what can be done about that, and perhaps relate to it what it is, what role you might play other than just voting this time, which is great, but what you might do to participate in assisting other people in getting registered to vote. Okay, because that's going to be very important this time in mobilizing people to vote. Your generation is going to be the determining group of people who determine the future of the United States with regard to global climate change. And it's going to be this time in 2020. So that I would suggest that you think in terms of that, and look and find out what kind of things you can do, what's available for you to help do that, get people registered, etc. Okay? That's a good one. Okay. I know there's people working hard to take notes here so they don't have to look up. Okay.
I wanted to talk about environmental racism and like how, like specifically Native Americans. So I found a few different like instances in from like 2 other tribes where I wanted to relate it back to like Standing Rock and everything. Yeah,
that's the what's called environmental justice. There's a whole term they have for it now, and it's in the Environmental Protection Act. There's a whole provision in there about environmental justice, and you can take a look at. It was a kind of a transparent violation of the principles of economic justice in Standing Rock, but it'll harken back to. You're going to run into an interesting thing. I don't want you to get bogged down on it, but in the environmental justice provisions were put in there because it was, and I touched on this, I remember in one of the lectures, is that historically, the people who build what they call noxious infrastructure, like refuge dumps, reprocessing plants, sewage places, they tend to build those in or near racial minority communities. And not just tend to, but like overwhelmingly, like 86% of the time. And so the administration of Bill Clinton, they issued an executive order prohibiting the placing of noxious infrastructure, more specifically and narrowly, the federal government granting any licenses or permits to build one of these types of facilities in or near a racial minority community. And so you'll run into that executive order that was in 1997. And you'll run into a series of cases in which it was one of the more shameful exhibitions of simple bias dominating the judicial system, is that what would happen is that the people, in order to enforce that provision, would file a lawsuit in federal court saying that, look, they've just built this pipeline right in our neighborhood. We're a racial minority, and they had 8 other places they could put it, and they put it right here. And then the bad guys on the other side denied your right to have standing because the provision of the executive order didn't give you standing automatically because they did not put it in there. And then when they tried to get the statute amended, or the executive order amended, Bill Clinton was out of office, and you had a Republican administration, and they wouldn't change the executive order. They wouldn't supplement it by putting in the fact that an individual person had standing to raise the question. And then when a Democratic administration got back in, they went ahead and did it, and then the Republican courts were in place, and they said, oh, okay, you have standing, but all it does, if you file the complaint, all it'll do is grant a presumption that them placing it right in the middle of a racial minority community was a violation of the environmental justice standard, but it's a rebuttable presumption. And if in fact the bad guys make any argument whatsoever, they can rebut the presumption, because they can say, well, it was cheaper here because the land is worth less, or the people are less politically influential and they couldn't stop us. And so it was a straight business decision. I just did this because, and you'll see it goes back and forth like that. So, but I don't want you to get bogged down in that any more than I've already bogged you down. But don't worry, just proceed apace into that area, because it's an extraordinarily important one, especially in light of the issue of this manifest destiny and the racial motives of the oil corporations. Okay, because that racist dimension of their expansion of these pipelines is transparent. Okay? Okay. So what are you thinking about what you might want to do?
So far, I plan on talking about establishment of the establishment of unsafe water crisis in the United States. Talking about that, and just kind of like analyzing the Clean Water Act 2019 and analyzing the chemical and oil industries.
Yeah, I better help you out here. Remember that there are numerous justice issues involved in the trajectory of justice. The issue of clean water is one of them. For example, Flint, Michigan, and the poisoning of the water. It's not at all clear what connection that has to global climate change. Okay? Now, it is true, and here's a little better focus that you can have, is that the projected melting of the ice caps through global climate change and the increase in the mean global temperature is projected to eliminate almost a third of all of the fresh water on the planet, which are stored in the polar ice caps and the ice sheets. And the continued global warming and it's important to remember that just the melting of the glaciers themselves doesn't change the level of the sea levels. because the icebergs that are on the sea surface displace an amount of seawater underneath them equal to their mass. So it doesn't change the sea. That's not what causes the rise in sea levels. What causes the rise in sea level is either the melting of the ice on land, then cascading into the sea, but most importantly, or more importantly, the exciting of the molecules of water by the increased global mean temperature. It heats up the molecules and they expand. Literally, the ocean waters expand. And that's what causes the inundation of the shorelines. Okay? And that's going to potentially eliminate, and I want you to take a look at it. I won't tell you how much because you're going to find out in your research. But it's going to eliminate another significant percentage of the potential potable water on the planet, because it sinks into the ground, the salt water, and contaminates the underground aquifers, and that it travels inland. It travels under the ground inland in the aquifers to contaminate the water further in. And a thing that, I'm astonished that I never even thought about it, is it turns out that the global ice caps and the ice sheets, the attendant ice sheets, are the source of the rivers on the planet. And so that in the summer months, when some of it melts, it all runs down to the equator from the southern ice caps and northern ice caps, and it's the source of the rivers. And so with the melting of the polar ice caps, the other sources or would-be sources of fresh water, i.e. the major rivers of the world, dry up. Okay? So that your interest in dealing with water is an important one, because this impact on potable water on the planet of global climate change is a critical issue. And I would have been disappointed if I hadn't gotten at least one paper directing your attention directly to the impact on fresh water of global climate change. And it's going to be a really important experience for you to get some in-depth knowledge about that. And okay, so that's how I think you should go at it, rather than just the Clean Water Act and the contamination of water, which is a terrible thing in and of itself, but there's a more direct connection.
And Danny, I just wanted to also mention that Santa Cruz County has a big problem with saltwater intrusion into our aquifers, and particularly like the middle part of the county. So if you are interested in looking at like a local example of that, I would suggest checking out Santa Cruz County, because we have a lot of saltwater intrusion going on. It's just going to get worse as
Okay, so those are some of the ideas that are up already in front of us. And so I'd like you to be very creative about it. If you have any doubt at all about the focus of the choice that you're making, just give us a holler. You can contact John or me. You've got our emails. Just get a hold of us, and we'll help you precise your topic, because I want these papers, did I say 20 pages? No, okay, but 12 to 15 pages, because I want you to get a second breath in these papers, not just a quickie thing. I want you to be doing some thinking and follow up on some of your thoughts, okay? All right, terrific, kids. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.